Let me just summarize this thing with the modified Okamoto-Tanaka. The one thing I wanted to say is that the proof of forward secrecy for the active case relies on a key on a one of these knowledge of exponent assumption, which I'm not going to get into it, but just as one of the things that in my great open question it would be nice to solve. So the open question. So first of all, really the conclusion is amazing how little one may need to pay for authentication, even with full PFS. Yeah, just 3 multiplications is all it takes. No certificates, no extra communication. And really the open question that I find very interesting is to achieve the same performance properties. I mean, it doesn't have to be 3 multiplications. It can be something less than an exponent, but with full forward secrecy and over elliptic curves of something as efficient as that. So things that we would like to do in that case, or also in the case that we analyze here, is to get rid of the knowledge of exponent assumptions in the proof of full forward secrecy. And I didn't say this, but this protocol has something which is not very nice, which is that the element that is being sent is the product of the secret of Alice times g to the x. It is enough to find a single, not just x, a value g to the x used by Alice to find her secret key. Okay, which means that in this protocol g to the x, not just x, g to the x needs to be protected as well as the secret, the basic secret of Alice. So that's not a very nice property. So that's another thing that it would be nice to get rid of. But in any case, the main issue here is to show that actually it is possible to achieve some really impressive performance properties. Okay, the key exchange part of my presentation that I was supposed to finish in the previous hour, I will skip. The main thing I had to add is to show, let me see if I have a picture of this. Okay, so I showed the HMQV protocol. So there is a variant of HMQV, I mean, which is a one-pass key exchange, meaning a single, Alice sends a single message to Bob, and they derive a shared key, mutually authenticated, even though it is only one message from Alice to Bob. The key is actually authenticated by both of them, authenticated in the sense that they are, in the sense of the key exchange model, but in English is the fact that only the two of them can compute the key and no one else. The only problem is that because it's a one pass, then you can replay, right? The message, the message sent by Alice can be replayed, which means if someone sends again that same message, Bob will compute the same key as the first time that this was sent. So up to replay attacks, which are unavoidable in this case, this is basically the best possible. By the way, for the people that are aware of the work in TLS 1.3, TLS 1.3 has a mode called 0RTT, which is exactly this mode, except that in TLS 1.3, only the server is authenticated. While here, you authenticate both of them, basically, again, for almost the same price. The protocol consists on a sender and a receiver. The sender sending G to the Y, okay? As the server computes, sorry, this is not the server, this is the send. Okay, so again, the sender sends G to the Y, then the sender computes the key as this value, sigma. The receiver computes the value of sigma like this, and the key is derived as a hash of sigma, the identities, and Y. Okay, so this is a single value G to the Y on the wire, and they get a key that is authenticated by both. In something like TLS 1.3, it's also it's G to the Y is sent, okay, but only the server authenticates. Here, basically, the server and in this case would be the client and the server, or the sender and receiver. They both compute the same key, authenticated by both, and the only price is for the sender G to the Y and 1.17 of an exponentiation here, while for the receiver is just one exponentiation. So essentially, for the same price, you get for 1/6 of an exponentiation, you get a protocol with one single message, single group value, authenticate both parties. Only issue is replay. That's a problem of any protocol that sends only one message. By the way, you know, in the break we talk about HMQV in TLS. I mean, this is one advantage of using HMQV in TLS 1.3. In one message, you I mean, if you want to have client authentication, you get it in the same message. Anyway, I will stop here with the key exchange. Okay. I have to say this for a minute, because otherwise David will not be able to talk on Tuesday. Well, actually, maybe I will not do it. I wanted to show you an example where the performance of HMQV and the fact that it's only two messages, and that the messages are independent of the secret keys, an application that actually takes advantage of all these properties. This is for a protocol, a password authenticated key exchange protocol that uses HMQV. Actually, it can compose with any key exchange, but with HMQV is amazingly efficient. But I will skip this. I just wanted to have some introduction to PAKE, password authenticated key exchange, which is the subject that David is going to talk about on Tuesday. But he will have to talk without my introduction. I'm sorry. Okay, anyway, so let's, I prepared a full hour of key derivation functions, but I will do something shorter than that, if I can find the file here. Okay. So there is no handout. Probably this was posted in the KDF thing. There is a handout. Okay, perfect. Happy that you have a handout. I'm not going to use it. I'm going to use another talk I gave, which was shorter, and will be a subset of what you have. Okay, so this, yeah, I mean, this will be a little bit rushed. I'm not sure what exactly I'm going to do with this, but we'll see, because the whole thing, I don't have time to do it. So this is about key derivation. This is a subject that even for people like me that worked a lot on key exchange, it's something we always disregarded as I don't know, not very interesting, or I don't know, not very important. This is wrong. Actually, key derivation is a very fundamental primitive in any key exchange protocol, and actually it's not only key exchange protocols, it's in any case where you have some key material which is not perfectly, I mean, it cannot be used as a key, as a cryptographic key directly, and you have to derive from it a key, and the question is how you do it. It turns out that on one hand, definitions and this part is tricky. I mean, you have to be careful how you define the things. But also turns out that the theory of computation, in particular the notion of randomness extraction, becomes very, very handy when you want to deal with this notion of KDF. Let me change the order. Let's start from not defining formally, but saying what a key derivation function is. So in the examples I gave, usually the key is a key that belongs to these sigma values or G to the xy. These are group elements by DDH or by whatever assumption we use. Usually these are either group elements that are indistinguishable from a random group element in the group, or in the case of things like HMQV, where we use computational DFM, and then we need the random oracle to hash the group element to get a cryptographic key. In general, what we are dealing with is with the problem of starting with an imperfect source of randomness and deriving from it cryptographic keys, where imperfect means non-uniform, and not only non-uniform, but actually a source of randomness on which the attacker, observer, can have some side information. And examples are, for example, a random number generator, even a hardware random number generator, usually, something that measures some physical quantity. Usually, even these physical generators have some bias. You can maybe they output 0 with probability half plus epsilon for some small epsilon, so they are biased. And you want to take something like this and output something that is uniform. Of course, we are not going to output uniform. We are going to output something that is pseudo-random, meaning indistinguishable from uniform. So that's random number physical random number generators are a source of randomness. Operating systems, pseudo-random number generators, things that measure all kind of activities in the computer, in the network, and take that as a source of randomness and extract from that a key for a pseudo-random generator of the operating system. That's another example. And Diffie-Hellman in itself is an example of imperfect source of randomness, because we have these group elements that are indistinguishable from random group elements, but are still their group elements. They are not strings of the kind that we need. So taking source of so we can build for each source of randomness some function that will actually take that source and output a pseudo-random key. What we are interested in is in some general tool that will apply to all these different settings and still output a pseudo-random key, which we can then use to key some cryptographic function. Now, key derivation functions, actually, have not been, you know, I couldn't find anything formal written about key derivation functions. Of course, there is a lot of practical work doing the things, even though a lot of work that at the end of the day can be summarized about taking your source of randomness and applying a hash function. So really not much formal work. I wrote a paper on this stuff, on key derivations, with some formal definitions that you can find in the handout that I'm not using. I mean, again, it's not a full definition, but I mean, some sketch of the definition. But here I will skip it. Instead, let me talk about, I mean, the approach that actually is derived from these definitions. I mean, once you write down this definition, then it's quite clear what is the problem that you are trying to solve. Basically, you are trying to build a scheme that will have two functionalities, one that we call extract and then that we call expand. The extract will take the source of key material that you have, you know, a Diffie element value, an output of an operating system, PRNG, whatever it is, you will take that source, we call it source of key material, and apply to it a function that we call extract. Now, that function extract will have, in addition to the input of the source key material, will have as an input a salt value. Salt, you know, in its practice jargon for a random but non-secret quantity. If you are familiar with the notion of randomness extractors from complexity theory, then this salt is basically the seed of the extractor. Now, we are assuming that this salt value is a random value. It doesn't have to be secret, but it has to be random. Now the question is, we are trying to extract randomness, right, from an imperfect source. So where do we have this? Where does this random value come from? Okay. So here there are several answers. One of the answers is there are settings in which we actually don't have a random value to use as a salt. Okay? So answer number one, salt is not always available. Answer number two, salt is sometimes available. And I actually will show you examples. The reason that, you know, you say if you have already salt which is random, why don't you use that as a source of randomness? The point is that this salt is it's random but non-secret, and the difficulty is in deriving bits that will have secrecy. So I'll come back to the issue of salt. Now, once you take your source of key material and output from it a first key, okay, now you can use that key as a key to a PRF that can produce as many keys as you want. Why do you want to produce many keys and not just single key? So, for example, in key exchange protocols, you take your Diffie-Hellman value and you need to output from it not just one key. You need to output a key for encryption, a key for a MAC, I mean different keys. But of course, once you have one key that you derive from that Diffie-Hellman value, the rest of it can be generated with a regular PRF. So that part of the problem is essentially solved already. By the way, starting from this first key that we extract, we don't even need a PRF. We could have used a pseudo-random generator from that initial key. The reason we want to use a PRF and not a pseudo-random generator is because in the key derivation, usually we want to derive material that is tied to some context information. For example, if you are deriving keys in a key exchange, you will want to have the keys and in the input to this process to have the identities or the session identifier or stuff of that kind. That's the reason we are taking the initial key that we derive and using a PRF to expand it into more keys. So we call this approach the extract then expand. Again, two notions: extraction, expansion. Expansion, we don't have to talk too much about it because actually a PRF can do. The only point is that this PRF has to be a PRF that is variable length in input and variable length the output. And I'll show you a specific implementation of such a PRF. Okay, so the expand part is just a PRF with variable input-output length. The extract part is what we call strong randomness extractors. How many people know what a randomness extractor is? Okay, it seems like I have to define what a randomness extractor is. Randomness extractors are in complexity theory. Let's talk now before we go to the crypto part. Is a function that accepts two inputs, like this one, an input which is a source of randomness, an imperfect source of randomness, in which we assume it has enough entropy. Entropy in this case is measured as mean entropy, not Shannon entropy, where mean entropy is you look at the most probable element in a probability distribution, and the mean entropy is the logarithm of, or minus logarithm of the probability of that value. So basically, it's an entropy that doesn't measure an average entropy like Shannon does, but it measures a worst case entropy. What is the element that is the heaviest element in the distribution? And the extractor will take something like a source like that, and will take a seed. In the extraction literature, it's called the seed. We call it salt, and it will have the property that the output from this function is actually, in the case of complexity theory, is statistically close to uniform. Okay. In the case of cryptography, we, instead of requiring statistical closeness to uniform, we are happy with this thing being just pseudo-random. Now, it's interesting that there are very, very efficient extractors algorithmically very, very, very efficient, and one could actually use this in the crypto setting to extract randomness. However, there are several reasons why we don't use it, and one of them is that even though they are computationally very practical, they need salt or seeds that are as long as the input. And that means a lot of random bits that usually we don't have in the cryptographic settings in key exchange. They have high entropy loss, meaning that actually, for example, if you start with a Diffie-Hellman value with 256 bits, and you have to derive a 106-bit SHA-1 or something like this, the degradation of security is relatively high. So anyway, since I'm not going over I don't want to get into the properties of combinatorial extraction. So let me say that even though there are actually practical algorithms for randomness extractors that one could use in principle for extracting randomness in cryptography, in practical terms, we can't really do that. So instead, we are going to do something different. We know that after we extract the first key, we can expand that key using a PRF. So really the problem is how we derive that first key. And the idea is, since we are already doing a PRF for expansion, why don't we use it as also for extraction? So what I'm proposing here is to take a PRF and use the PRF with a random but known key applied to a sample from a source of randomness. So what can you say about a PRF where the key is random but known? So basically, by the security of the PRF is completely based on the secrecy of the key. But is it possible that a PRF with a random key will output stuff that is away from uniform or distinguishable from uniform? If I give you, if I tell you what the key is, okay, then of course you can compute by yourself whatever you want. But I have a sample of let's say a Diffie-Hellman value, which you don't know. You have a Diffie-Hellman value that you know was derived from a key exchange. You are an attacker, you don't know, and I'm telling you that I'm going to take a PRF, key it with a value that the attacker knows. Okay, what can I say about this output? Of course, if the key is a secret, then I know that the output is pseudo-random. But what happens if the key is known? Do you have any idea what can happen then? So when the key is known, actually you have no guarantee, in the sense that even if you don't know the sample is, okay, but you have some information about it, like in the case of Diffie-Hellman, you know g to the x, g to the y, but you don't know g to the xy. Even then, you can actually show examples of PRFs that when you use a known key, a public key, you can derive information. However, the interesting thing is that it's not easy to find these counterexamples. Basically, we build these counterexamples using some very, very artificial constructions. Okay, so the question is, okay, so we cannot prove anything with a PRF with a random known key, okay, for this application. But maybe if we use a practical PRF like HMAC or something based on AES, maybe this will work. The intuition is that we want the output to be close to uniform, and the output from the PRF, if the output from the PRF would have been away from uniform in a measurable way, okay, let me put it this way. You expect for example, what happens to the statistical properties of the output of a PRF? even if you know the key, okay, the output will still have statistical properties of uniform values, right? Because if the statistical properties are, biased from half zeros, half ones, that's something you could measure and distinguish from uniform. So there is some type of statistical properties that the output of the PRF will preserve, even if with a known key. Anyway, this is the question basically that we ask is, can we use the PRF that we use for expansion also for the extraction part? And in particular, can we use this? Can we use HMAC for this? So what I'm going to show now is that HMAC as a transformation based on a hash function actually has some good properties as extractors. In the sense, again, it gets a source of imperfect randomness with sufficient entropy in a non-uniform way, and what it outputs is actually something that is close to uniform. So let me, before I do that, I have to remind you of what HMAC, how HMAC works. Actually, I remind you of how NMAC works. NMAC is the basic function on which HMAC is based. So let me just, I'm sure that you all can write the formula of HMAC without even in the middle of the night, but I'll better remind you. Actually, how many people know how HMAC works? Well, it's more than extractors. Okay. So anyway, HMAC is based on Merkel-Damgard functions. Merkel-Damgard starts with the compression function, which is a function of two inputs and one output. Usually this is called the IV, and this is the data input. And a Merkel-Damgard function iterates this function, where in each iteration, you take the input, you break it into blocks, and then input each block to the function, where you start with some IV on the first block. This produces an output that you use as input to the next iteration of the function. You take the next block and so on. You iterate over all the input, and you get a hash at the end. Okay, that's the unkeyed Merkel-Damgard. Now you can define a keyed Merkel-Damgard, which is exactly the same, except that instead of the IV, you input a key. Yeah, it's not very clear, but there is a K here, a key that replaces the IV. Okay, so this is just a definition of what a keyed Merkel-Damgard is. And now we can define NMAC. NMAC is simply a function which has two keys. Okay, the first key, it uses to key and Merkel-Damgard. Okay, so what I showed here, this construction uses K1. Okay, K1 applied to the output, to the input, and to this result you apply one operation of the compression function. Okay, this is NMAC. It's a no. You can think of it as a double application of the function, except that the internal one is on a long input, and the external one is just in one block, which is the output of the previous one. This is the This is the picture. Now, HMAC is the same thing, but K1 and K2 are actually derived from a single K using the hash function. And for what I want to show you, we don't need these details. So let's just remember how NMAC looks. Again, it's one application of the compression function applied to the output of the internal, what we call the cascade function, which is this iterated Diffie-Hellman. Keyed instead of an IV is the key K1. Okay? The reason I'm showing you how this thing works is because I will show you how, assuming certain assumptions on the compression function, we can prove some good properties of the output that will help us claiming that this construction will works as a good extractor. Okay, so what we are going to do, we are going to instantiate the, remember, the extract then expand approach, which means first you extract a first key KPRF, and then use this KPRF as a PRF to output as many keys as you want. We are going to do this where both the extraction part and the PRF part both use HMAC. Okay, so this is the construction. Again, the reason to use this is, on one hand, it's practical because just by using HMAC you cover the two functionalities, but more importantly, or not less importantly, is that actually we can prove some properties of HMAC as extractor and as PRF just by making assumptions on the compression function of the underlying hash function. By the way, HKDF is a particular construction, okay, that defines exactly the things. HMAC as an extract with salt being a random value, SKM being a source of keying material. Think about it as a Diffie-Hellman or the output of a random number generator, okay? And the expand function is what I said before. You need a PRF that has a variable length input because it can be applied to anything, and it has variable length output because it may need to create a arbitrary number of keys or key bits. So the way that HKDF defines this expand function is by using a feedback mode, which means you start with the key, KPRF, that you got from the extract. You apply it to KI, to one block of keying material to produce the next one, and so on in feedback mode. I also said before that even though in principle having a first key from the extraction, you could use any pseudo-random generator to expand it into many keys, I said before that actually we prefer this to be a PRF because we need also to add some context information in many applications. So we don't use key PRG, you use the HMAC with KPRF, with any given output length, and with info as an input. Okay. Again, that info will have different values depending on the application. For those that are familiar or become familiar in the future with TLS 1.3, all the key derivation there is done using HKDF, and you can see there how the info value is very significant, in particular to do what is called key separation, which is, if you have two different settings where you start with the same keying material, you want to use this info to actually generate keys that are computationally independent from each other. Okay, now being able to use extract and expand using HMAC is definitely a practical thing, because HMAC is efficient, because it's already there, because you're already using it for a PRF. So it's definitely practical. The question is whether we can say anything about these, the properties of this scheme. And it turns out that in this sense, HMAC is actually very, very, very versatile, because actually it has properties that are good for different types of applications of HKDF. So HMAC as a single function, a single function, I mean not a keyed function, but you know, just with a fixed key or a known key, is good as a hash function, because it derives the properties of Merkel-Damgard, and it has shown to be a good random oracle. I'll say more about that. So actually, you know, I think that I'm saying things that I have later, but okay. So we will see that HMAC can be used. It has good properties when used as an unkeyed function. When used as a family of functions with secret or public keys, I mean secret or known keys, and actually supports different functionalities like PRF, extract, or random oracle, collision resistance. And these are different properties that different applications of key derivation functions will require. So it's very versatile, and the kind of results that justify these uses are of this form. We want to show that if the compression function has some property A, then HMAC has property A prime. Okay, so the idea is that instead of assuming the HMAC as a iterated function has some properties, we only want to assume properties of the underlying compression function, right? That function that is being iterated. And really, we can show interesting examples. For example, if the compression function is pseudorandom, a pseudorandom function, then the iterated function is also pseudorandom. And same for extraction for random oracle. By the way, the way we show the things usually is to prove them for NMAC, and then we extend them for HMAC. Sometimes, I mean, usually the result is much cleaner for NMAC, and then usually we have some transformation from HMAC to NMAC that sometimes works well, sometimes require an additional assumption. So, but the results I'm going to show are actually results for HMAC itself. Or if it's NMAC, then I will say that. Okay, so here are examples of things that can be proved for NMAC or HMAC. So you can prove that if the compression function is a pseudorandom function, then NMAC is a pseudorandom function. That is basically the main reason why HMAC became HMAC. I mean, that was the property. Actually, originally HMAC was thought of as a message authentication code. Then the proof were developed for pseudorandom functions. Anyway, we know that if we can prove that the compression function is pseudorandom function, then NMAC is a pseudorandom function. So if what you want to use NMAC for is a pseudorandom function, then it's enough to prove or assume that the compression function is pseudorandom. Okay? Another result that we know about HMAC is that if F, the compression function, is a random oracle family. Random oracle family means that each one of the function, if you fix the key to the function, and now for every fixed key you have a function in the family, then that family of function, if the compression function is random oracle, then HMAC is indifferentiable from random oracle, where indifferentiability is a notion, if you don't know about it, which actually captures indistinguishability, but for ideal objects. In this case, ideal objects is random oracle, ideal ciphers, or stuff like that, where actually the regular notion of indistinguishability doesn't hold, but there is this related notion of indifferentiability, which again, I think that the slides that you have talk about this, but I will not touch on it now. In addition, you can prove that if the compression function in itself is a random oracle, then HMAC has good extraction properties, also as a hardcore. That again, let me skip that. Actually, let me say this. You see, in kick change, sometimes we extract randomness from a Diffie-Hellman value. Now, if you are in a setting where you can use the decisional Diffie-Hellman, for example, the basic, something like the ISO protocol or the Sigma protocol, you prove that the output from the protocol G to the XY is indistinguishable from a random group element. Now, and then you can also prove that groups have some level of mean entropy. Again, that also needs to be proven. That is written in your slides. So in these cases, really, you have the basis for extraction. You have enough mean entropy. Again, that's not statistical mean entropy, it's computational mean entropy, but you have enough some entropy you can extract from. But in some cases, you cannot actually prove that your group element is indistinguished from random. The only thing that you have is that the computational Diffie-Hellman. Computational Diffie-Hellman means that you have G to the X, G to the Y. You cannot compute G to the XY. Okay, so you have this impossibility of computing G to the XY, but the DDH, you cannot assume it, or it doesn't hold, or something like that. What happened in that case? In that case, you don't have the mean entropy to extract randomness, but you have some hardness. It's hard to compute G to the XY. Functions that, we know that if something is unpredictable, or it's a one-way function, you can still extract some randomness, and that corresponds to the notion of hardcore functions. Okay, hardcore functions are functions that actually will be able to extract some random bits even if you don't have enough entropy. So that's one of the settings in which we have to extract. And actually, you can show this is, if F is a random oracle, if the compression function, then HMAC, you can prove actually that HMAC is a good extractor, but also that is a good hardcore function, which is one of the applications that we need in these settings. Actually, we can also prove all these results are use some okay, this one no. This one is a PRF, implies PRF is fine, but all of these results assume some form of random oracle. Actually, there are also some results that can be shown, the security of NMAC or HMAC as an extractor, even if you don't assume anything idealized. Let me skip this. Again, these are things that can be proved, and actually it's a significant thing that we can have as results in this case that don't use idealized assumptions. And let me finish with showing you an application of HKDF one to IKE in IPsec and one to TLS. Okay, so IKE uses HKDF or something similar to HKDF. Remember that I said that in some cases we actually have random salt, okay, random salt, which means we have random bits that are public, random but non-secret. So what we do in IKE, we take the nonces. Parties send nonces against replay or as session identifiers. We take these nonces that were chosen by the parties as random values and use them as a salt for the extractor. Actually, it means that we take the HMAC, we take the nonces as the key and apply these to G to the XY. In this case, we extract from a Diffie-Hellman value. And here you get two functionalities. In the regular case where the nonces are known, you actually get the session key in which HKDF is used as an extractor. Okay, input salt and input a source of key material. However, in the public key exchange mode of IKE, which actually I showed before the scheme protocol, in which the parties encrypt, they choose a key and encrypt it to the other party, then there the nonces are basically secret. So when you apply HKDF with the nonces to G to the XY with secret nonces, you are getting the same construction, but now you can actually use the fact that HMAC is a PRF, getting actually a stronger result. So it's the same construction, sometimes works as an extractor, sometimes works as a PRF, and it's not something that you say, if the nonces are public, I do something, if they are secret, I do something else. So that gives you this versatility. TLS 1.3 actually uses these properties in many different ways. For example, there is in the case of TLS with the pre-shared key, you derive the session key. This is simplified. There is more elements to it, but the HKDF applied to the key, that is the shared key, applied to a Diffie-Hellman value G to the XY. Now here, if the key, why do we do, if we already have a shared key, why we do also a Diffie-Hellman exchange? This is for forward secrecy. It's because if the key K is ever revealed, we still want the session key to be secure thanks to the Diffie-Hellman. So here we need to analyze the protocol in two cases. One, if neither K or X or Y are ever disclosed, then of course this is secure. But what happens if K is disclosed or G to the XY is disclosed? So we want to prove that as long as one of them is secure, then the session key is secure. So here we say, okay, if the key K, the shared key is ever revealed, then what we have here is an extractor that works with a random but known key on a Diffie-Hellman G to the XY. In that case, the security of the scheme is based on the properties of HKDF as an extractor. If the key remains secret, but G to the XY is revealed, then what we had here is a PRF with a secret key applied to G to the XY. And even if G to the XY becomes public, these values, since key is secret, remains secret. So that's the general idea of using HKDF in different settings under different assumptions to get different properties. Now, if you don't, what people did before HKDF, what's the typical key derivation function? Just apply a hash on whatever you have. So you have a source of key material, hash it, okay? You need many of these, hash it with one concatenated one, hash it with the two concatenated with the three, and things like that. So basically, any of these things assumes the hash to be a random oracle. By the way, they assume a hash which to be a random oracle when we know that actually Merkle-Damgard hashes are not random oracles. Even if the compression function is random, the iterated function is not random. You know, can you give me an example of why the iterated function, an iterated Merkle-Damgard will not be a random oracle even if the compression function is random?
You have inputs that are the same on the first I block.
If they are the same, and then what?
So the output is a concatenated output, right? Yeah, hash on the first block, hash on the... Maybe I don't understand correctly the Merkle-Damgard.
Wait, any other idea why the Merkle extension attacks? Exactly. The Merkle-Damgard has what's called, it breaks under extension attacks, which means if I know the value of the hash function on some input, okay, now I can compute the output of that function on any input that is an extension of the first one, right? So if I know the hash value on a prefix, I know the hash value on, I can compute it myself on everything else, or everything. So this is called an extension attack, and that's enough proof to show that Merkle-Damgard actually is not a random oracle. One of the properties of HMAC is because of this nesting of the compression function applied to the iterated function, that actually can be shown that the function does preserve the random oracle property, in the sense that if the compression function is random, then the whole thing is what is called indifferentiable from a random oracle. So to summarize, I know this was very fast and more kind of, you know, to give you some elements, maybe to look at the slides that you got, or to read the paper, or ask me questions later. But the important thing here, I think, is that we have now some formalism to define what a key derivation function is, and to have an implementation of this notion that is practical and can be used in many settings without changing the function. Finally, this is becoming a kind of the standard for key derivation functions, and there must be people that have been using HKDF during the talk. If anyone used WhatsApp, then I mean, this now is being used by TLS 1.3, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, so it's becoming a popular way of doing key derivation. And that's it. Thank you very much. I think that I exhaust you less than I exhausted myself. and I'll be here the next days. So you ask me now or later, ask many questions as you want. And thank you for paying attention.